You notice the young boy's small stature, his sharp eyes, and the way he already carries himself with a seriousness beyond his years. He is not the playful child who lingers in games. Instead, he drifts toward solitude, finding companionship in books and in his own ambitions. Corsica itself is a battleground of identity, shifting between French and Italian influence. Napoleon grows up absorbing this tension, always aware that he is both part of France and yet set apart. Historians still argue whether this divided heritage fueled his hunger for power, or whether it simply hardened him into the figure he would become. As you walk through the narrow streets of Ajaccio, you can smell bread baking, hear fishermen shouting along the shore, and see young Napoleon avoiding the noisy crowds. He clings to his sense of difference, believing he is meant for more. There is even a quirky story told that as a boy, he once commanded a small band of children to stage mock battles in the courtyard, already bossing them about with a seriousness that startled onlookers. His imagination was filled with battles and empires before he ever wore a uniform. Inside his home, you see the family table crowded with children. Napoleon is one of many siblings, but he is never lost in the mix. His sharp temper and stubborn pride mark him out. He quarrels, he debates, he insists. His mother, strict but loving, often sides with him, believing in his spark even when it grates on others. You can almost picture her gaze, steady and protective, urging him to rise above his circumstances. Education soon becomes the key. Carlo, eager for his son to climb higher, secures a place for him at a French military school for the family. This is a chance at survival, a hope that Napoleon can step into a larger world. You watch as he prepares to leave Corsica, a boy of 9 boarding a ship toward France. The island recedes behind him, the cliffs dissolving into the horizon. He clutches his books and his pride, already determined to prove himself against those who will surely sneer at his accent and his heritage. The ship rocks gently, and you can almost feel the sea air brushing your face as you imagine the boy as thoughts. Alone, far from his family, he is stepping into a world of harsh discipline and endless comparison. He knows he is smaller, poorer, and marked as an outsider. But in that distance, in that sense of exclusion, he also finds a fire that will carry him forward. This first journey, from Corsica to mainland France, is more than just miles across water. It is a crossing of identity. He will always keep his island pride, but he will begin to shape himself into something larger, something he believes destiny demands of him. Historians still wonder whether he ever truly let go of Corsica, or if, in some corner of his heart, the island remained his truest home. And so you drift back to the stone streets, the salty air, and the rocky shores where it all began. A restless boy, a strict mother, a fragile family name, and an island too small to contain the dreams that already stretch beyond its horizon. You find yourself walking into the tall stone gates of a French military academy, the kind of place where every step is measured, every button inspected, every mistake corrected with a sharp word. The young Napoleon is here now, far from Corsica, standing among boys who come from wealthier families and who speak with the polished accents of Paris. He feels small in this world, his Corsican lilt making him a target of teasing. Yet you can sense how his pride shields him, how the same stubbornness that once drove him to command games in Ajaccio now drives him to prove he belongs. The air smells of ink, chalk, and damp wool uniforms. The corridors echo with the clatter of boots on stone floors. Here, every day begins before dawn, with drills, lessons, and rigid routines. You trail behind him as he carries heavy books on mathematics and history. He prefers numbers and science over the flowery French literature his classmates adore. Historians still argue whether this leaning toward logic over art shaped the way he later planned campaigns, so precise, so relentless. He studies artillery with unusual devotion, drawn to the science of firing angles and the mechanics of cannons. While others daydream of cavalry charges, Napoleon sketches diagrams of fortifications. You see him hunched at a desk late into the night, candlelight flickering across his tired face. Quirky stories linger from these years, like how he sometimes skipped meals just to afford more books. Hunger seemed a smaller price compared to the hunger he felt for knowledge. Outside the classroom, life is harsher. Other boys mock his accent and his proud Corsican temper, but instead of shrinking, he withdraws into solitude. He begins to read about great men from history, especially heroes of Rome. The lives of Caesar and Alexander the Great fill his imagination. You notice how his gaze grows sharper when he thinks of them, as if he is measuring his own future against theirs. At times he writes letters back home, to his family still on the island. The words reveal both homesickness and determination. He misses Corsican warmth and his mother's steady guidance, but he knows he cannot return unchanged. He is shaping himself into something the island could never contain. It is here, in the cold discipline of the academy, that his sense of destiny hardens. The school itself is strict, but it also provides him opportunities. He begins to shine in mathematics, earning praise that sets him apart from his peers. Even so, he remains an outsider socially. Imagine him sitting alone at mealtime, his bread untouched, his mind somewhere far beyond the chatter of the hall. He dreams of battles, of strategy, of maps that spread beyond the narrow dining tables. In one small detail that lingers from these years, it's said he sometimes carried an old copy of Plutarch's Lives with him, drawing strength from the stories of ancient leaders. He read not only to learn but to remind himself that greatness was possible, even for someone scorned in the moment. The years pass, and soon he moves on to the École Militaire in Paris, the most prestigious of all. You feel the weight of the capital now, the bustle of coaches, the swirl of powdered wigs, the constant hum of politics in the air. Here Napoleon is even more determined to succeed. He accelerates through the program in record time, finishing in a single year what normally took to some of his instructors whisper that his mind is quick but restless, sharp but impatient. Historians still debate whether this impatience became both his greatest strength and his undoing later. Paris offers a glitter of luxury, but he remains austere. While others spend their stipends on clothes and pleasures, Napoleon saves every coin. His uniform is plain, his habits simple. He writes once that he eats quickly, almost carelessly, never giving food much thought. He is not here to enjoy life, he is here to climb, and climb he does. By the time he leaves the academy, he is already commissioned as a second lieutenant of artillery. He is still just a teenager, yet already shouldering the responsibilities of command. You can almost see him standing at the edge of a training field, watching as cannons are rolled into place, already thinking not like a student but like a man who intends to bend battlefields to his will. Walking away from the academy grounds, you feel the shift. The boy who arrived awkward and mocked now departs trained, sharpened, and carrying inside him both knowledge and resentment. He is ready to enter a world still trembling from revolution, a world that will test him far more than any examination ever could. The stones of the school fade behind him, but the discipline, the mathematics, the lonely hunger for recognition, these remain etched into him forever. You step now into the crowded, restless streets of Paris, where the air is charged with a kind of fever. It is the late 1780s, and revolution is breaking loose. Cobblestones rattle beneath the march of citizens, pamphlets flutter from hands to hands, and anger spills from taverns into the open squares. You follow young Napoleon as he threads his way through the noise. He is still a junior officer, still untested in war. But the world is moving fast, and history is about to sweep him forward. The revolution has torn apart the old order, toppling the monarchy and filling the city with both hope and dread. You hear the bells of churches tolling, you see tricolor banners strung across windows, and you feel the tension in every glance between strangers. For someone as ambitious as Napoleon, this chaos is not frightening, it is opportunity. Historians still argue whether he was truly inspired by revolutionary ideals, or simply saw them as a path toward power. But either way, he learned quickly to navigate these dangerous waters. His first true test comes in Toulon, a port city seized by rebels and defended by foreign allies of the monarchy. The French Republic desperately needs victory, and Napoleon, still just a young artillery officer, is given a chance. You follow him into the gunpowder haze of the siege, the salty air mixed with smoke, the thunder of cannons echoing against the Mediterranean waves. He studies the enemy positions, sketches plans late into the night, and insists that seizing key high ground will turn the battle. It is here that his sharp mind shines. His strategy succeeds. The cannons roar from the captured hills, and the enemy fleets retreat. In the aftermath, Toulon falls, and Napoleon earns his first real taste of glory. He is promoted, noticed, suddenly not just another name on the officers' list, but a man marked for greater things. The smell of smoke still lingers in your nostrils as you walk with him through the ruins, the pride in his step impossible to miss. There is even a small, almost comical story told about him during this campaign. When directing artillery fire, he reportedly became so focused that he barely noticed the brim of his hat catching sparks from a nearby cannon blast. Instead of flinching, he kept giving orders, his soldiers half in awe and half in disbelief. Whether true or exaggerated, it paints the image of a man already consumed by duty, blind to anything but victory. From Toulon, his career accelerates. The revolution devours many, but somehow he survives its shifting tides. In 1795, Paris once again erupts in unrest, with royalists rising against the government. Napoleon is called to defend the new republic. You can almost hear his calm voice as he orders cannons to be lined up along the streets, their barrels facing into the surging crowd. When the uprising begins, grapeshot sweeps through the rebels, ending the revolt in a single, brutal moment. The event becomes known as a whiff of grapeshot, and though the phrase sounds light, the reality is not. The streets are littered with broken banners and frightened silence. Historians still debate whether this ruthless efficiency saved the republic or betrayed its ideals. But what is certain is that Napoleon cemented his reputation as a man who could restore order when others faltered. And in Paris, reputation is everything. The halls of power begin to open to him. Invitations to salons, introductions to leaders, even whispers of his potential all swirl around. It is also here that he meets Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow with charm and connections. You picture the shy but determined officer standing in a grand salon, the chandeliers glowing overhead, as Josephine's laughter carries through the room. She is older, sophisticated, and far more worldly than he. Yet he falls for her swiftly. Their romance will carry both tenderness and turmoil, but in this moment, it is simple. A man on the rise finding a partner who opens doors into society. Walking with him through the city at dusk, you can sense how the revolution is both shaping him and feeding him. The chaos of Paris becomes his training ground, not only in battle but in politics, relationships, and ambition. His artillery mind, so focused on precision, now turns toward life itself, calculating moves, planning futures, weighing risks. The boy from Corsica, mocked for his accent and poverty, is now the young commander of men, a rising star in a nation desperate for leaders. And as night settles over Paris, you realize this is just the beginning. The revolution is not done with him, and he is far from done with it. You march now along narrow mountain roads, damp with rain and mud, the sound of soldiers' boots slapping the earth as they trudge behind their new commander. It is 1796, and Napoleon has just been given command of the army of Italy. What he inherits is not a proud force. It is half-starved, ragged, and demoralized. Their uniforms are worn thin, their pay delayed, their confidence nearly gone. And yet, as you walk beside them, you see how the small Corsican with the sharp eyes begins to speak, his words cutting through despair. You are hungry and naked, he tells them, but I will lead you to plenty. His voice is steady, his presence magnetic. The soldiers, who moments ago looked ready to collapse, now lift their heads. Something in his certainty pulls them forward. Historians still argue whether this was true charisma or simply timing. But one thing is clear, Napoleon knows how to take weary men and make them believe in miracles. The Italian campaign begins with daring. You march across rivers, over passes through the Alps, where snow stings your face and the wind howls. The enemy underestimates him, expecting the young general to move slowly, cautiously. Instead, he strikes with speed. One moment you see Austrian and Piedmontese forces bracing themselves. The next, Napoleon's troops appear where they least expect, descending like shadows from the hills. At Montenotte, then at Lodi, his victories pile up. The Battle of Lodi especially becomes legend. You can almost hear the thunder of drums as French troops charge across a long wooden bridge, grape-shot raining down on them. Napoleon himself stands at the front, urging them onward, his coat fluttering in the smoke. Afterward, the soldiers whisper that he has something more than skill, that he is touched by destiny. Napoleon later says that it was at Lodi he first felt he might truly be a great man. There is a quirky tale from this time, told by his men. After one battle, a soldier spotted Napoleon sitting on a cannon, eating a crust of bread as if it were a feast. The general, who ate the same dry rations as his troops, won not only their obedience but their affection. They began to call him the Little Corporal, a nickname that carried both humor and respect, a reminder that their commander was one of them. Italy itself offers strange contrasts. You pass through villages where peasants cheer the French liberators only for nearby towns to shut their doors in suspicion. You wander into palaces stripped of art, paintings crated and sent back to Paris as spoils. Napoleon mixes war with politics, promising republics and new freedoms, yet also funneling treasures home. Historians still debate whether he believed in spreading revolutionary ideals or simply in enriching France and himself. The campaign moves swiftly, one after another. Coalitions crumble, Piedmont surrenders, Austrian armies retreat, and by 1797 the Treaty of Campo Formio secures French dominance in northern Italy. You feel the pride of soldiers who only a year earlier were broken and starving, now striding with full bellies and jingling coins in their pockets. Napoleon has given them not just victories but belief. But victories bring attention. Back in Paris, leaders watch this rising general with both admiration and unease. A man who can rally armies and reshape borders is also a man who could one day challenge the very government he serves. Yet Napoleon keeps pushing forward, his letters to Josephine filled with passion and impatience, his mind always racing toward the next horizon. One evening you find yourself in Milan, where Napoleon hosts a gathering. The rooms are filled with officers, officials, and musicians. Yet while others laugh and drink, Napoleon sits apart, bent over maps, even during a celebration. A violin plays softly in the background, candles flicker, but his gaze stays fixed on rivers and roads, calculating future marches. Even in moments of triumph, his restlessness never ceases. Historians still argue whether his brilliance in Italy was luck, circumstance, or pure genius. But as you walk with him down the quiet streets of Lombardy after victory, you can feel how the campaign has transformed him. He is no longer just a general serving France. He has become Napoleon, the man Europe must reckon with. The mud, the smoke, the bridges of Lodi, the weary men who now cheer his name, all these linger in your mind as you leave the Italian roads behind. The young commander has proven himself, and soon he will crave a stage even larger than the hills of northern Italy. You step into a world of sand and sunlight, where the air is heavy with heat and dust, and the horizon seems endless. It is 1798, and Napoleon has turned his eyes toward Egypt. The decision is daring. Rather than face Britain head-on in Europe, he seeks to strike at its empire indirectly, by threatening the route to India. You can almost taste the dryness of the desert wind as you watch ships sail across the Mediterranean. carrying soldiers, horses and cannons to a land that feels ancient and otherworldly. The landing near Alexandria is harsh. Soldiers stumble onto the shore, squinting against the brightness, their wool uniforms stifling in the heat. They march through palm groves and dusty villages, bewildered by the strange new land. Yet Napoleon, small beneath the blazing sun, rides at the front with confidence. He tells them, "Soldiers, from the tops of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." The phrase echoes across time, a mixture of grandeur and theater, as if he is placing his men inside the sweep of history itself. Historians still argue whether those exact words were spoken or embellished later, but the image endures. The Battle of the Pyramids soon follows. You hear the thunder of muskets, the clash of sabers, the cries of men. Mamluk cavalry charge with glittering armor, but Napoleon's squares of infantry hold firm. The French formations, disciplined and unyielding, mow down their opponents. Victory comes swiftly, and with it, the French seize Cairo. The ancient city hums with markets, calls to prayer, an unfamiliar sense of spice and smoke. Soldiers wander streets lined with minarets, astonished at the culture around them. Yet not all is triumph. Back at sea, disaster strikes. The British fleet under Admiral Nelson finds the French anchored at Abukir Bay. The Battle of the Nile is a catastrophe. Flames consume ships, powder stores explode, and the Mediterranean night is lit by fire. You stand on the shore, watching helplessly as the fleet is shattered. The soldiers in Cairo are now stranded, their connection to France severed. Still, Napoleon turns setback into spectacle. He shifts focus from war to discovery. Among his troops are not only soldiers but scholars, mathematicians, artists, engineers. They begin cataloging Egypt's wonders, sketching temples, studying hieroglyphs, measuring monuments. Out of this comes the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, a single slab that will one day unlock the language of the pharaohs. You walk beside these scholars as they crouch in the dust, copying inscriptions, their excitement as fierce as any general's. There are small, curious stories too. Some tell of French soldiers attempting to make bread in the desert, only to discover that the sand ruined every attempt. Others remember the strange sight of camels being used as beasts of burden for French artillery, lurching awkwardly beneath the weight of cannon barrels. The mix of ancient land and modern army produced scenes both impressive and absurd. Cairo itself becomes a stage for Napoleon's restless energy. He attends meetings with local leaders, issues proclamations mixing respect for Islam with revolutionary rhetoric, and tries to balance conquest with governance. Historians still debate whether he was sincere in these gestures of respect or merely using them as tools of control. To the Egyptians, his presence was often puzzling. A conqueror who quoted the Quran, a European who brought scientists as well as soldiers. But as months pass, challenges grow. Plague sweeps through the ranks, morale falters, and resistance stiffens. Napoleon presses further, leading an expedition into Syria. The march is grueling, the heat oppressive. At Acre, his advance stalls. The fortress resists, and disease spreads through the camp. You see him visiting the sick, a scarf pressed against his face to ward off infection, trying to show courage even as exhaustion gnaws at him. Eventually, he abandons the Syrian campaign and returns to Egypt. Yet by then, the larger picture has shifted. News arrives from Europe that France is unstable again, its government weak and threatened. Napoleon senses opportunity without waiting for orders. He leaves his army behind and secretly sails back to France. Arriving quietly but decisively, you are left standing in the desert, watching the sands drift over abandoned camps. Egypt will remain in French memory as both triumph and failure, glorious victories on land, disastrous losses at sea, and the seeds of modern Egyptology planted amid war. For Napoleon, it is less about what was won or lost and more about what he learned. He has touched ancient history, stood among pyramids, and seen himself reflected against the backdrop of empires past. And now, he is sailing homeward, ready to step not only into Paris but into power itself. You drift now into the hushed streets of Paris in 1799, a city weary of endless upheaval. The revolution, once full of fire, has burned itself into exhaustion. Governments rise and fall, factions bicker, and the people crave stability. Into this fragile moment steps Napoleon, returning from Egypt not as a defeated general but as a figure of legend. The failures at sea are forgotten by many. The victories at the pyramids glow brighter in memory. You can almost hear the whispers ripple through salons and marketplaces. He is the man who can restore order. Behind closed doors, plots unfold. The Directory, the current government, is weak and unpopular. Napoleon, still only in his 30s, becomes the tool or perhaps the master of a group of politicians seeking to replace it. The plan is a coup, and you walk beside him as he strides through the corridors of power with calm assurance. On the morning of November 9, 1799, soldiers line the streets, their muskets gleaming as lawmakers are forced out of their chambers. Shouts echo, papers scatter, and the government collapses in confusion. By evening, France has a new leader. Napoleon emerges not as king, not as emperor yet, but his first consul, a role that blends republican tradition with extraordinary authority. Historians still argue whether he intended dictatorship from the start, or whether power simply gathered around him as events unfolded. Either way, France, weary and battered, accepts him with relief. In the days that follow, he sets about reshaping the state. You walk through candlelit rooms where drafts of laws are being prepared. His handwriting scrolls across pages, quick and impatient. He reorganizes administration, centralizes authority, and establishes financial reforms. One enduring creation is the Bank of France, a foundation of stability. Later, his civil code, the Napoleonic Code, will rewrite the laws of the land in clear, structured language that survives in parts of the world even today. And yet, even amid these grand acts of statecraft, there are quieter, stranger moments. One story tells of Napoleon attending the opera, where the crowd erupted in cheers, shouting his name again and again. He reportedly seemed almost shy, lowering his eyes, uncomfortable with such raw adoration. For all his ambition, he often carried a reserved demeanor in public, a man who preferred planning to basking. Josephine, too, remains at his side. Their marriage, filled with tenderness and storms, weaves into this period of transformation. She brings connections to high society, smoothing his path into the Parisian elite. But whispers of her affairs linger, and Napoleon himself is not always faithful. Still, in these years, their bond fuels his sense of legitimacy. Walking into their household, you might notice the mix of military maps and perfumed salons. A world where gunpowder and roses live side by side, Paris itself reflects the change. Streets are quieter, the guillotine less busy, the fever of revolution cooling into a steadier rhythm. You can smell bread again in the bakeries, hear music drifting from open windows, sense the relief of a population that no longer fears daily chaos. For them, Napoleon is not yet the conqueror of Europe. He is the restorer of calm. Still, ambition never rests. He launches campaigns to secure his position, defeating Austrian forces once again at Marengo in 1800. You can almost feel the tension of that day at first. French lines buckle, soldiers retreat, and it seems all is lost. Then, at the final hour, reinforcements arrive, and victory turns. Marengo becomes a symbol of his resilience, a reminder that fortune itself seems to favor him. Historians still debate whether Marengo was a triumph of strategy or pure luck, but Napoleon skillfully spins it into legend. In paintings and stories, he becomes the man who turns disaster into glory, and the people believe it. Through these years, you sense a pattern forming. He takes disorder and turns it into control, confusion and turns it into clarity. Each step makes him indispensable. Each victory, whether on the battlefield or in the council chamber, tightens his grip. And so, you leave the corridors of the consulate, the ink-dotted papers, the quiet halls of Paris where new laws are drafted. Napoleon is no longer just the young general of Italy or the daring adventurer of Egypt. He is now the ruler of France in all but name. A man who has slipped from soldier to statesman, and soon, into something even more. You step into the vast echoing space of Notre Dame Cathedral on a winter morning in 1804. Candles flicker in their tall holders, casting a golden glow against ancient stone walls. The smell of incense mixes with the perfume of gathered nobility, and the air hums with expectation. Today, Napoleon is no longer just first consul. He is about to crown himself emperor of the French. You walk behind him down the aisle, noticing how carefully every detail has been staged. His robes shimmer with embroidery, heavy on his shoulders, while Josephine waits beside him in flowing silk. The Pope himself has been brought from Rome to bless the ceremony, but Napoleon, never content to play the role others expect, insists on rewriting tradition. When the moment comes, he does not kneel to receive the crown. Instead, he lifts it with his own hands and places it on his own hands. Then, gently but firmly, he crowns Josephine. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Historians still argue whether this was pure arrogance or symbolic independence from church authority, but the image is unforgettable. A man who takes power not by permission, but by his own will. The streets outside roar with celebration. Cannons thunder, bells ring, and banners flutter in the cold air. You walk through Paris that night, watching windows glow with candlelight, as citizens toast their new emperor. Some cheer with genuine joy, others with cautious acceptance. For many, it is less about monarchy restored and more about stability promised. After years of revolution and chaos, Napoleon embodies certainty, yet beneath the splendor lies strain. His family members grumble and jockey for influence. His brothers, whom he raises to kingships and dukedoms, often prove quarrelsome. Josephine herself faces pressure, as the lack of an heir casts a shadow over their union. In salons and corridors, whispers of succession stir uneasily. Still, for now, the empire blooms. You stroll through glittering halls of the Tuileries Palace, where courtiers bow and uniforms shine. The air smells of waxed floors and polished silver. Napoleon moves briskly from room to room, issuing orders, discussing battles, signing decrees. He works with relentless pace, sometimes dictating to several secretaries at once. Quirky stories survive, like how he often took short naps in odd places, even on campaign tables, his hat pulled low over his eyes, then awoke moments later refreshed and ready. Beyond the palace armies march. In 1805, you find yourself beside him on the fields of Austerlitz, one of his most famous triumphs. The dawn rises misty, the frozen ponds glimmer under the pale sun. He feigns weakness, luring the Austrians and Russians into overconfidence. Then, with perfect timing, his troops strike through the center, splitting the enemy lines. The brilliance of the maneuver leaves Europe stunned. The frozen ponds crack beneath retreating soldiers. The battle is decided, and Napoleon is hailed as a master of war. Historians still debate whether the icy ponds swallowed thousands or if later accounts exaggerated the scene. But in memory, Austerlitz shines like a crown jewel of strategy. In the aftermath, treaties are signed, thrones are rearranged, and the map of Europe bends under his hand. You trace the borders with your finger across a map in a dimly lit war tent, watching as kingdoms are reshaped. Brothers become kings, allies are rewarded, rivals humbled. His vision of empire spreads like ink across parchment, but with grandeur comes strain. Britain, ever defiant, remains a thorn. At sea, the French Navy suffers a crushing blow at Trafalgar in 1805, where Admiral Nelson secures British dominance of the waves. You feel the spray of the ocean, hear the crack of cannon fire, and sense the frustration as Napoleon's dream of invading England collapses. His empire will be landbound, forced to stretch across Europe instead of crossing the Channel. Back in Paris, life continues in ceremony and splendor. The empire presents itself in glittering coronations, fine portraits, and endless processions. Yet Napoleon remains restless, pacing, planning, pushing. You notice how even in moments of triumph he seems unable to pause, as if he fears that stillness itself might undo him. And so, the golden crown on his head shines brightly, but it also weighs heavily. He has taken what no Frenchman before him dared, reshaping not just a nation but the entire European order. And still, beyond the glowing halls and cheering streets, new challenges gather like storm clouds on the horizon. You wander now through the glittering corridors of the Tuileries and the grand salons of Paris, where every surface shines with gold and every mirror reflects power and ambition. Napoleon's life is a blur of ceremonies, audiences, and paperwork. Courtiers bow, diplomats whisper, and soldiers parade beneath painted ceilings. You can almost feel the weight of expectation pressing on him, the constant hum of responsibility in every room. For all the grandeur, there is strain. The man who once marched across muddy Italian roads now navigates politics with the same strategic mind. Though the battlefield is far more subtle, even within the palace, his energy never rests. He reads reports late into the night, issues decrees before dawn, and checks troop movements while walking past fountains and statues. Historians still debate whether this tireless drive was genius or obsession, but the effect is undeniable. Orders flow from his pen, shaping Europe like a sculptor molding clay. You notice small habits that persist from his earlier life. Quick meals, short naps in odd corners, endless attention to detail. His restless mind never fully rests, even amid marble floors and chandeliers. Meanwhile, the empire expands and strains simultaneously. Wars rage across the continent. The Peninsular War in Spain, campaigns in Austria, and Prussia and Napoleon's brothers sit on distant thrones, struggling to maintain authority. You can imagine the letters piling on his desk, complaints, requests, intelligence reports, and drafts of propaganda all mixing together. Quirky stories survive from these years, like how he sometimes dictated letters while taking a bath, ink-stained fingers scrawling on waterproof pads. It's an image that softens the relentless drive with a touch of humor. Palaces offer more than administration. They are theaters of influence, social gatherings and political maneuvering. Josephine, now well-established, hosts dinners that are both elegant and strategic. Diplomats smile, whisper, and sometimes scheme, all under the soft glow of chandelier. Napoleon drifts through these rooms, charming yet calculating, listening as much as he speaks, watching for weakness, listening for opportunity. You can smell the waxed floors, the perfume, and faintly, the horses from the nearby stables. Despite all this, he cannot fully escape fatigue. Soldiers on campaigns grow weary, peasants resist conscription, allies grumble. He pushes relentlessly, moving armies with precision, yet always aware that one misstep could undo everything. Historians still debate whether his ambition in these years sowed the seeds of eventual collapse, or if external factors alone caused the empire to falter. And then, there are moments of quiet, rare but vivid. You might glimpse him walking alone along the Seine, coat collar turned up against winter wind, deep in thought, or scribbling in a small notebook, mapping strategies while Paris continues to bustle around him. Even the great emperor allows these pauses, brief as they are, where the hum of the city softens and he can reflect. Yet strain is never far. The more he conquers, the more vigilance is required. Alliances fracture, old enemies regroup, and Britain, never fully defeated, continues to challenge French dominance. The endless motion of armies, governments, and diplomacy keeps him awake and restless, always planning the next move. Through all this, you see a man balancing brilliance and burden. Palaces shimmer, uniforms gleam, victories are celebrated, but beneath it all, the demands never end. The grandeur surrounds him, but so does the unrelenting weight of responsibility, strategy, and expectation. You trudge now across frozen fields, the air biting at your cheeks, the wind howling like distant drums. It is 1812, and Napoleon leads his Grande Armée into Russia. Millions of men, horses, and wagons stretch out as far as the eye can see, a river of determination and ambition. At first, the campaign moves quickly. You watch as cities fall, supplies are seized, and Russian forces retreat, seemingly inviting the French deeper into the heart of the empire. Historians still argue whether the invasion was inevitable hubris or a calculated risk that simply went too far. The landscape grows harsher, forests close in, roads turn to mud, and rivers freeze under icy skies. You notice the soldiers' boots, worn and soaked, their faces pale under frostbitten noses. Hunger creeps into every march, slowing men who once moved with unstoppable speed. Napoleon rides ahead, small and wiry yet resolute, directing movements with sharp commands. Even in the face of cold and exhaustion, he projects calm. Some of his quirky habits persist. He often checks the temperatures of the snow and insists that food be rationed precisely, almost obsessively. Moscow lies ahead, a jewel of architecture and culture. The French enter the city, expecting victory and supplies, only to find streets emptied, fires consuming buildings, and a population that has fled. The city offers no comfort, only devastation. Smoke curls into the pale winter sky as Napoleon walks through the ghostly avenues, the echoes of emptiness pressing on him. The strategy of scorched earth leaves the army without shelter or sustenance. The retreat begins. You trudge with him across icy rivers, through forests where frost clings to every branch. Soldiers collapse, wagons break down, and horses stumble in the snow. Disease spreads. Hunger gnaws relentlessly. Napoleon, always ahead of his men, feels the strain of both leadership and responsibility. He orders care, insists on discipline. Yet even his presence cannot halt the relentless toll of winter. At times, small moments of humanity shine through. You see him pause to comfort a wounded soldier, offer words to a group shivering in the snow, and insist that officers share their rations fairly. The army, once so unstoppable, now stumbles under the immense pressure of climate and distance. Quirky stories survive, like how he rode on ahead of his troops, wearing a borrowed fur coat several sizes too large, the hat slipping over his eyes as he peered through frost and wind. Europe watches with bated breath. Allies and enemies alike measure every movement. Historians still debate whether the Russian winter alone caused disaster or whether strategic missteps compounded the suffering. What is undeniable is the human cost. The Grande Armée, once more than 600,000 strong, emerges from Russia a fraction of its former size, broken, exhausted, and demoralized. Napoleon himself, though unscathed physically, carries the weight of this retreat. You can almost see the tension in his gaze, the lines of worry that deepen despite his usual calm. Moscow's ruins and the endless snows mark the turning point of his dominance. Europe begins to sense vulnerability in the man who once seemed invincible. The Russian winter leaves more than frostbite and hunger. It leaves lessons in limitation, in overreach, in the fragility of human ambition. As you follow him through this frozen landscape, it is impossible not to feel both awe at his resilience and sorrow for the countless lives lost along the way. The dream of European conquest has been checked by nature itself, and the emperor must reckon with the enormity of what remains. You step now onto the lonely shores of Elba, the small island where Napoleon arrives in 1814, exiled yet unbroken. The Mediterranean sun glints off the water, the waves lap gently against the rocks, and the air smells faintly of wild herbs. Gone are the glittering palaces, the armies of hundreds of thousands, and the sprawling maps of Europe. Here, life moves slowly, and the former emperor finds himself in a rhythm dictated not by ambition but by isolation. The island is modest, its hills dotted with small villages and olive groves. You wander with him along narrow paths, the cobblestones worn smooth by generations. He surveys his tiny court, a handful of loyal aides and soldiers, and the people of Elba. Curious about this man who once commanded the continent, historians still argue whether this exile was punishment or a chance for reflection. But for Napoleon, it is a strange mixture of both. He occupies himself with administration and small projects. Roads are repaired, gardens cultivated, and the local economy monitored with meticulous care. Even in exile, he cannot resist the urge to organize, to plan, to impose order. You notice his mornings filled with maps and letters, afternoons with walks along the cliffs, and evenings in quiet reflection, the sunset casting long shadows across the island. Quirky stories linger from these days, like how he once rode a donkey through the villages, inspecting workmen, drawing smiles and laughter from locals who could not resist the sight of an emperor in simple garb. Yet exile weighs on him. The isolation sharpens memories of glory and loss. You feel the pull of ambition in his every glance toward the horizon, imagining France across the waters, Paris alive with intrigue and opportunity. Conversations with aides often drift toward the old campaigns, the triumphs and the mistakes, the maps spread out on tables as if plotting a return. Even in reflection, he measures himself against history, wondering whether his legacy will be as a hero or a cautionary tale. In 1815, the call of France proves irresistible. You walk beside him as he embarks on the dramatic return known as the 100 Days. His presence inspires loyalty. Troops and citizens alike rally to his cause. The journey is swift, bold, and calculated, culminating in the moment he re-enters Paris, crowds cheering, banners waving. It is a fleeting restoration, a final surge of the man who could bend Europe to his will. But destiny has shifted. The Battle of Waterloo awaits. You trudge alongside him as armies clash. The summer sun oppressive, the ground churned by muskets and cannon fire. His strategies, brilliant yet strained by exhaustion and overextension, meet determined opposition. The Allied forces, coordinated and resilient, repel the French advance. Napoleon witnesses the limits of his genius, the fragile line between victory and defeat. Historians still debate whether a different choice at Waterloo could have altered history, yet the outcome is clear. Defeat brings a second exile, far harsher and more permanent. You watch as he is escorted to Saint Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic, surrounded by cliffs and cold waters. The emperor who once commanded armies and crowned himself now faces solitude that even Elba did not offer. His daily routines are quiet, punctuated by long walks, letters, and recollections of campaigns. Quirky habits persist. He measures the weather meticulously, plants gardens, and discusses strategy with companions, imagining the world he once ruled. Time stretches slowly. Napoleon reflects on his life, achievements, and losses. The grandeur, the battles, the coronations, the palaces, all fade into memory. He writes memoirs, striving to preserve the image of a man who lived with intensity and purpose. You feel the quiet weight of contemplation settle over him as the wind brushes the cliffs, the distant waves reminding him of both isolation and connection. And finally, in May 1821, Napoleon passes away. You linger with him in the soft stillness of Saint Helena, the island quiet, the ocean vast. The man who shaped continents, who lived with relentless drive and extraordinary ambition, leaves behind both legend and lesson. His life, so full of triumphs and trials, reminds you of the delicate balance between greatness and overreach, between the human and the historical. You step back, taking in the cliffs, the sea, and the memory of a man who dreamed larger than most, whose ambitions and flaws intertwined to shape an era. The story of Napoleon fades into history, but the echoes of his life linger in every map, every battlefield, and every whisper of ambition that stirs the human heart. The sun dips low over the horizon, casting gentle light across the cliffs of Saint Helena. You feel the day soften around you, the air slowing, the distant waves rolling with a quiet rhythm that seems almost like a heartbeat. Napoleon's life, so vivid and storm-filled, now rests in memory, a series of moments that stretch across continents, campaigns, and decades. You imagine him walking these cliffs, pausing to watch the horizon, reflecting on victories and losses alike, the wind tugging at his coat, the sea whispering stories of faraway lands. In this calm, it is easy to let the mind drift. You think of the young boy in Corsica, awkward and stubborn, learning arithmetic and artillery by candlelight. You trace him across the streets of Paris, the battlefields of Italy, the sands of Egypt, and the snow of Russia. Each step, each choice, shaped a man who could inspire armies and unsettle nations. Yet alongside the brilliance were moments of fragility, of human emotion, of love, doubt, and longing. The weight of empire, the intensity of command, the thrill of triumph, and the sting of exile all converge in this quiet place. You notice the little things, the careful measurement of weather, the sketches of maps, the small gardens planted against the harshness of isolation. These details remind you that even the greatest lives are built from tiny acts, the gentle rhythm of thought and reflection, the ordinary alongside the extraordinary. As the sky deepens into twilight, the sound of the waves carries a lullaby-like calm. You can feel the pulse of history slowing, each moment a soft echo. Napoleon's life stretches into legend, but here, it is simple and serene, a story of ambition, resilience, and humanity. The cliffs, the sea, the wind, they cradled the memory, leaving you with the sense that even greatness finds rest, and even storms eventually settle into quiet. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts ease into stillness, imagine the gentle roll of the ocean, the soft hush of time, and the slow exhale of a life that shaped a world. Let the memory of Napoleon drift away with the tide, leaving a calm, steady rhythm in its place. Let your mind rest, your body soften, and your breathing slow, carried by the whisper of history, until sleep comes quietly, gently, and without hurry.